June 2, 1944, 23:58, over the Seine Valley, cloud from horizon to horizon. A cold gray lid pressed down on France. If you're new here, welcome to What If Wars. Hit subscribe so you don't miss what comes next. Now, breathe in with me. The cockpit is dim, oxygen masks are tight, the windshield shows nothing but murk. You can't see a rail yard, you can't see a river bend, you can't see a city. So, how do you bomb what you can't see? For most of this war, weather has been the best German defender. One bad ceiling and 1,000 miles of planning dissolves. Crews climb into icing, level off inside a milk bottle, and wait for a break that doesn't come. The target might be there or 100 miles off. Turn back or drop blind. Either way, you lose the rhythm that keeps pressure on an enemy's nerves, on his fuel, on his trains. But 1944 is the year clouds stop being a no and become a go. It is the year the Allies learn to drive by instruments and hit by schedule. And the crew in this darkness is part of that turn. A voice slips into the headphones, calm and clipped, not from this airplane but from a van in England. The oboe controller reading ranges like a metronome. Out past the nose, somewhere under the cloud, a French marshalling yard holds a tangle of sidings, wagons, switch points, and the little repair shops that keep locomotives breathing. The RAF Mosquito at the heart of this stream rides an invisible arc in the sky, a perfect circle cut by radio and time. When the controller's count meets the pilot's needle, the bomb aimer thumbs a switch and a marker goes. No one sees the ground. They see trust, the glow of a stopwatch, the steady hand on the throttle, the quiet faith that math can paint a dot exactly where darkness hides the target. The marker falls into cloud, and the yard below starts to glow, where there was no light a breath before. That tiny timed blip tells hundreds of bombers where to place their weight. Another airway, another crew, another tool. In a B-17 over East Anglia, at dawn, the radar operator leans over a round screen everyone calls Mickey. The scope blooms and fades, a green world with its own coastlines and shadows. Rivers show as bright necklaces, city centers as fat smudges, synthetic fuel plants as awkward clustered stars. There are no windows that help tonight. Only this circular window with a sweep hand and a haloed ring that swells as they close in. The navigator murmurs headings. The pilot holds the needles as if they're glass. The bombardier watches a shape on the scope move under the graticule and knows he will pickle drop when the ring kisses the mark. They are learning a new way of seeing. They are learning to be on time rather than on sight. Across the stream, steady as breath, GH keeps the herd together. Think of it as the difference between a soloist and a chorus. Oboe can conduct a single pathfinder with exquisite precision. H2X lets any crew with a set ride weather like a blindfolded driver reading the road by rumble strips. But GH makes a mass sing in time. Formations hold a measured turn in cloud above a target, each ship arriving on cue, bomb doors yawning to a clock instead of a skyline. Pinpoint gives way to throughput when the aim is a rail complex or a repair yard. You don't need a single brick. You need the system to miss its next train. Here are the stakes. The transportation plan is in motion, and the calendar is not forgiving. In the yards around Paris, Aulnoye, Trappes, Juvisy, La Chapelle, Rouen-Sotteville, Lyon, wagons must be sorted, engines repaired, loads turned around, lines kept open. Every night you can't see is a night the Germans can move. Every scrubbed mission is a gift of time to an army that wants to push tanks and men toward Normandy. And then there is oil, the pulse inside every engine. Synthetic plants at Leuna and Böhlen, refineries along the Baltic like Pölitz, complexes tied to rivers and rail. If you hit them by schedule, they don't get up again before the next blow. If you wait for perfect weather, they breathe. So you start to feel the difference in your chest. Weather doesn't cancel, it calibrates. The team in England calls ranges, the pathfinder drops a star into darkness, the stream holds its circle, the radar scope grows a ring, the bombardier commits on a green bloom, and somewhere below, a yard loses a night's work or a plant loses a week's output. Not because a single bomb is perfect, but because a campaign is on time. Listen to the engines cough as they pick up trace ice. Hear the navigator's pencil tick. Picture the wind pushing a marker off its ideal fall and the main force correcting in cloud, trusting the clock more than their eyes. This is the human part of a technical revolution. Ordinary crews, inside machines, taking high-risk decisions with instruments most of them learned on the fly. It's not glamorous, it is relentless. Keep that first date in mind, June 2nd, because within days the beaches will open and every delay in those yards will count double. And keep an eye on the calendar when the autumn comes, when Overcast parks itself over central Germany and tries to slow the oil campaign to a crawl. Tonight, a single Pathfinder's timed blip will shift the beat of a region before D-Day. Months later, under a ceiling that never seems to break, a green radar bloom will keep the pressure on fuel when sight would have said no. That's the story we're going to follow, through cloud and signal and the stubborn rhythm of schedule. April 18th, 1944, 22:47, south of Paris. Solid cloud at 10,000, no moon. A mosquito from 8 group holding a silent arc over traps. The oboe controller's voice is steady as a heart monitor. Range, range, range. In the right seat, the navigator taps the stopwatch. In the left, the pilot rides the invisible circle the way a skater holds the edge of black ice. No lights below, no horizon. At the counted second, the bomb aimer clicks and a canister slips away into milk. Nothing. Then a pulse of color unfurls through the cloud like a bruise spreading. The first marker takes, and out over the Seine, the main force turns toward a dot in the dark that only instruments can prove is there. The crews were warned, this isn't about bridges. This is about the yards that sort France's bloodstream. Traps first, then Juvisy-sur-Orge on the Essonne, then La Chapelle wedged into the north of Paris. One oboe-marked fall after another, night after night, weather or no. GH keeps the streams tidy. Above cloud, you can feel the circle in your stomach more than you can see it. Gentle bank, level, bomb doors opening on time rather than on sight. When a crosswind pushes a marker off the bull, a second Pathfinder drops a corrective star. When brakes open, the crews glimpse switch yards cupped in smoke, and then the hole closes, and they're back to trusting the clock. By dawn, the ground tells the story better than any communique. At Juvisy, strings of wagons sit with their noses butted up against points that no longer move. A set of repair sheds stands with doors blown in like a mouth knocked open. Workers pick through cinders to find tools. A locomotive waits for a piston that won't arrive because the warehouse that kept it safe is black and dripping. The yards don't die cleanly, they choke. Classification slows. Wagons miss their turns. An entire region's timetables fray. And that is the point. The transportation plan isn't a single punch. It's a metronome. April becomes May, and the names stack up like stations on a route map. Aulnoye at the hinge toward Belgium, Lyon further east, Rouen-Sotteville on the Great Bend of the Seine. Nights when any older war would have scrubbed, the vans in England key up, and the oboe beams go live. Pathfinder mosquitoes run their arcs above a lid of cloud so thick it eats starlight. Range, range, now. A canister falls. A green or red burns. The stream arrives in time. Bombs go where the system needs them most, not because someone saw a target house with their eyes, but because an equation put a light exactly where a yard's throat should be. In the morning, the sidings look like a child spilled metal filings across a magnet, haphazard, crowded, nothing flowing. Even inside the cockpits, you can feel the plan. GH takes the romance out of it and replaces it with certainty. A Lancaster turns in a measured orbit above Rouen, as if it's pinning a compass point through cloud, while the navigator mutters time to release in a voice that never rises. The pilot's hands are light. The bomb aimer doesn't ask for a view, he asks for confirmation. Above them, a second wave holds the same circle, 1 minute behind, the way cars queue at a toll booth. Throughput beats finesse when the target is a living machine that can heal if you give it space. On May nights when the wind shoves the markers, everything depends on judgment. You hear the Pathfinders argue softly over the air. Do they split the difference? Do they shift the circle? Do they lay an offset so the main force lands where the yard will be by drift? The best of them can sense a gust by how the clouds scud against the wingtip light. They drop a second indicator, not on top of the first, but where the stream's momentum will carry the bombs. It's an art painted blind, learned by repetition, remembered by results at dawn. The human cost hums under every scene. A French signalman stands in a shack with the windows papered and listens to the far-off whump become a long roll, knowing what that will do to his schedule book tomorrow. A German railway officer with nicotine-stained fingers draws new arrows on a traffic map and realizes he's lying to himself. A platoon of infantry waits in boxcars that don't move for 12 hours. The men in the air never see any of this. They only see instruments doing the work their eyes cannot, and they hold the schedule because the schedule, not a perfect aim point, is what turns Paris into a tangle. June gathers itself like a held breath. In the days before the beaches open, trapeze is hit again, then Lyon, then Rouen-Sotteville. Some nights the cloud thins and you catch a glimpse, points spidering in a geometric maze, a river bend catching a dim gleam, a sudden tongue of flame licking between coal heaps, and then the whole seals, and you're back to trust. The briefings say the same thing every time. Don't chase the break, trust the mark, stay on time. And when the landings come, the math pays off. Reinforcements don't move like they should. Wagons back up outside Paris. Locomotives that should have been turned in a day soak in the dark for a week. Road columns improvise and spend fuel they don't have. The transportation plan is not glamorous. It is not a single photograph. It is the steady drum that says, no matter the weather, we're here again tonight and tomorrow and the night after. Hold that rhythm in your head, because in the next part, we're going inside the machines themselves, into the Oboe van counting ranges, into the GH navigator's timed orbit, into a B-17, where a green circle of light teaches a crew to see through cloud and commit when sight would have said, wait. June 4th, 1944, 21:12. A camouflaged hut on an English field smells like wet canvas and warm valves. The oboe controller sits with his headset crooked, one hand on a key, the other on a clock that rules the sky. He never sees France. He sees range, numbers stepping down in his ear, echoes sliding back from a mosquito that's a pinprick above a deck of cloud. He talks like a surgeon, low and exact, shaping a circle the air crew can't see. A second technician watches a trace creep across a cathode, nods, and draws a pencil line with a wrist that doesn't shake. The controller calls, hold, now. In that instant, miles away, a pathfinder's thumb taps a switch and a canister falls into milk. The men in the hut don't hear an explosion. They hear silence, and they trust the math. When the operator's needle comes back clean, the controller exhales and resets the clock. Another arc, another now, another dot painted in the dark. In the air, the mosquito feels like a violin held under a chin. The pilot keeps the note steady, tiny corrections against a wind he can't see. The navigator whispers time to range in a voice the pilot knows better than his own. They don't bank hard. They don't hunt for breaks. Their world is an invisible ring, and their job is to stay on it until the light they've never seen burns for men they'll never meet. The bomb aimer doesn't ask questions. He counts down with the controller, almost superstitious about the last three numbers, and lets go when the voices match. It is intimacy by radio, a trust built in ounces and seconds. By late June, the weather scowls and the work moves inland. On a rough day over Rouen, a pathfinder calls the mark, and something ugly barges into the headphones. The tone that should be clean is wobbling like a siren. German jamming tries to smear the timing. The controller pinches the bridge of his nose, shifts frequency with a twist that feels like unlocking a safe, and rides the echo back into clarity. In the yard below, smoke pots turn the air into a dirty curtain. Through the cloud, there's no visual cue at all. A second mosquito takes the corrective arc, a touch wider, and drops an offset indicator so the stream's bombs land where drift and wind say the target will be, not where it was. In the hut, the controller's knuckles go pale around the key. On the scope, the trace steadies. On the ground, the yard's throat will clog by morning. The same night, a GH navigator sits hunched under a red lamp in a Lancaster that hums like a sleeping beast. His world is two watches, a pad dense with pencil marks, and a set whose tone rises and falls as they skate around an unseen center. He keeps a formation of strangers on time, calling minute marks, adjusting headings by a hair, holding the orbit above a rail complex that would be nightmarish to pick visually, even on a clear day. In the intercom, you can hear the other crews breathing. Bomb doors open not at the sight of a shed or a switch ladder, but because the minute is right. A flare bursts somewhere under the cloud. The circle holds. The crew feels it in their stomachs, the constant bank and straighten, a carousel that trades pinpoint for volume because the target is a machine that breaks by overload. The navigator feels the jamming rise like static rain, slides the set to a cleaner slice of spectrum, and the tone comes back true. The pilot grins in the dark. The geometry wins. Up at 20,000 over the industrial rivers, a B-17 rides the winter air of October as if the whole continent has gone cold. The H2X operator is the only one with a view that matters. His scope glows with a ruined green, the sweep hand ticking like a second heart. Coastline first, bright and certain. Then a river bend that looks like a necklace. Then the blobby bloom of a plant complex crouched by the water. There is no town to see, no chimney to line up, only the picture that radar paints, a ghost map the crew has learned to trust. He calls ranges to the bombardier, who has stopped waiting for a hole in the overcast and started waiting for the ring on the screen to kiss the aim point. Wind shears shiver the airplane. The picture squirms. The operator rides gain and tilt until the bloom settles. Stand by, now. The bombs fall toward a shape only electrons can draw. On days the forecast would have scrubbed last year, the decision to go comes down to the men at these scopes and dials. A group commander looks at a ceiling that will never lift and says yes because H2X can find the river and the plant, because Oboe can mark the yard, because GH can keep 100 bombers honest in a blind turn. The crews climb into wet cloud. The engines collect ice that cracks off the prop roots like plates. The intercoms hiss with bursts of German music and coarse noise, and still the rhythm holds. The enemy sends smoke to hide the yards. The yards still glow under cloud because a time star burned through. The enemy throws jamming into the air. The controller shifts. The navigator trims. The operator tweaks the set, and the beat resumes. There are moments when it almost breaks. A Pathfinder's first marker lands long, and a gust threatens to seduce the main force off the plan. The lead crew resists the urge to chase what little their eyes can guess. They trust the corrective indicator, they hold the circle, and the yard gets the weight it was meant to carry. A Mickey operator loses the picture for a breath as rain hammers the radome. The bombardier swallows, the scope blooms back, and the release comes a second later than planned, which is still on schedule by the standard that matters. The next raid will arrive before repairs are done. If you tilt your head, you can hear the campaign as percussion, a controller's key tapping, a navigator's countdown, a radar sweep's heartbeat, bomber doors opening to the tick, not the view. Clouds stop being a ceiling. They become drums that keep time. And in that time, the transportation plan becomes the oil campaign's rehearsal. Because when autumn parks a lid over central Germany and refuses to move, the only way to keep the fuel under pressure is to trust that green circle and fly anyway. That's where we're headed next, into a sky that never clears and a plant that keeps trying to stand up between blows. October 7th, 1944, dawn 9:11 above the Elbe. There is no sky, only a lid of dirty wool pressed flat on Germany. The forecast says the ceiling won't lift all day. Last year, that would have been the end of it. Today, the order is simple. Go. In the nose of a B-17, the H2X scope lights the only map that matters, a green ghost world where rivers gleam like chains and cities swell into bright, soft islands. The operator rides the gain with 2 fingers, breathing through his mask, coaxing a river bend out of static until it sits steady enough to trust. The bombardier doesn't bother asking for a hole. He watches the ring swell on the screen, a halo closing on a shape that marks a plant complex tied to a bend, the Leuna Merseburg web that feeds engines at the front and fighter schools in the rear. The pilot keeps the ship level as the airplane tick-tick-ticks with ice. They tried to wait this front out yesterday. Visual aiming was scrubbed. The crews left strapped in for an hour before the call came down to stand down. The plants had one more day to breathe. Somewhere in those pipes, cracked sections waited for welders who needed another day without a siren. Somewhere in a training base, a fuel truck made one more run. The oil campaign cannot afford generosity. This morning, the group commander looked at the forecast again and said what the new year demands. Radar only. H2X will make the picture, and schedule will make the hit matter. The scope dips, the operator tweaks tilt. Coastlines are easy, inland targets are not. and today the rain bands smear everything that isn't anchored by water. He finds the sail like an old friend and uses it the way a blind walker uses a wall, tracing along to the spur where Leuna blooms as a bright smudge. The navigator checks drift with a voice that sounds like gravel. The bombardier inhales and lets the breath out as the ring creeps toward the smudge. He can feel men behind him waiting for a glimpse that never comes. The entire formation trusting the circle and the bloom as if they were flesh and blood guides. Stand by, now. Bomb doors yawning are a sound you feel in your ribs. The release thumps through the airframe. There is no view of chimneys, only the knowledge that a green picture was enough. Down the line, other groups find other rivers. One rides the Weisse Elster toward Böhlen. Another leans on the Uder's silver to feel its way to Pölitz. Smoke pots go up and turn whatever breaks exist into gray rivers of nothing. But under 10/10 cloud, smoke is just superstition. Jammer noise rattles the headsets. The operator moves the set a hair, and the static falls away like rain off a tin roof. The formation holds its speed because schedule is the weapon. Damage today matters because tomorrow will follow. The planes are not trying to kill a dragon with one spear. They are trying to keep a heart from beating again. For a week, the weather sits like a dog on a rug and won't move. The pictures come off reconnaissance as slivers between storm bands. A crude tower slumped, a hydrogenation unit black with soot, a tank farm cracked open like a nest of eggs. Production charts, the kind no one sees outside rooms with locked doors, begin to wobble. Aviation gasoline allocations for fighter schools thin, then thin again. In a gray barracks on a gray airfield, an instructor runs a finger down a list of flight hours and scratches out a day for his cadets. In a panzer unit off the front, a company commander watches a truck column shuffle to a halt and counts jerry cans like a priest counts votives. The crews in the air don't see any of this. They see the ring on a screen kiss a smudge and hear the thud of release. They go home cold, tired, and certain only of one thing. They were on time. When the weather finally tries to bully the campaign into silence, the operators bully back with patience. There are days when the bloom jitters and the bombardier's thumb hovers a second longer than the textbook says, and in that second, 100 decisions line up behind his. If he chases a fleeting bright spot, he teaches everyone to worship the wrong god, luck instead of cadence. If he waits for the ring to settle, he buys the next sortie a world where repairs lag behind attacks. He waits, he drops. The plant's outage stretches not because any single bomb found a single pipe, but because 100 cuts land on the same body before the last wound can clot. At debrief, someone always wishes for blue sky. It's human. It's also beside the point. Blue sky makes for photographs. Overcast makes for pressure. In the autumn of 1944, the weather looks like victory's enemy and becomes its accomplice. Oboe dots a yard that would have fed repair crews. H keeps a mast turning above a complex no eye can see. H2X turns rain and cloud into a map. The enemy is clever and stubborn, smoke, jamming, dispersal, but the clock is more stubborn than all three. You can almost hear it in the briefing rooms. Tomorrow, we do it again. Remember the first night over the Seine and the promise we made? Schedule over spectacle. One more part, and we'll bring the whole arc down to a single human conclusion. What this tech really won, and how cloud turned from ceiling to conveyor belt, until movement slowed and fuel ran thin. December 12th, 1944, 0531, East Anglia. The runway lamps are halos in fog, engines warming the air into a low thunder that feels like a heartbeat for the whole field. The crews walk past frost-silvered wings and trade the last words they always trade, the same small jokes that keep big fear in its box. The forecast is a single word that would have canceled a war 2 years ago. Overcast. The brief is a single idea that keeps this one moving. On schedule. You can measure a campaign in steel and gasoline, but you feel it in moments like this. A pathfinder checks his watch under the flare of a match and knows he will be a dot of timing over a French yard before sunrise. A GH navigator tucks his pencil behind his ear and sees the night as a circle he will hold without ever glimpsing the ground he's shaping. A Mickey operator rubs his eyes, sits down to a green moon, and understands that if the picture holds long enough to catch the river bend, someone far away will be short of fuel next week. They do not talk about perfection. They talk about rhythm. They talk about being there again tomorrow. Think back to the first night we shared, the lid pressed over the Seine, the oboe voice coaching a circle you could not see. That small marker burned through a wall of weather and told hundreds of crews where to place their weight. It did not make a photograph. It made a beat. Days later, the beaches opened and trains that should have been there were late, and trains that should have been late never came. The yards were not destroyed so much as convinced to fail on time. Carry that same thread into autumn and lay it over the oil map of Germany. Ceiling locked, rain hanging in sheets, a radar screen brightening with a river like a wire, a plant like a bruise, a decision like a held breath. Bomb doors yawning to a clock instead of a skyline, releases thudding through wings without any crew ever seeing a chimney or a stack. Plants that would have used a clear day to stand back up found the next blow already in the air. Fighter schools trimmed flight hours until an instructor with a tired face stared at a blackboard and told his class that today they would practice on the ground. The men who flew this learned to trust instruments the way they used to trust eyes. They learned that a gust could slide a marker and that good crews dropped the correction where the wind would push the bombs, not where pride said the bull should be. They learned to let static hiss past and find the clean tone under it. They learned that jammers could shove them around the dial, but not off the time. They learned that when weather tried to make them wait, waiting was the enemy. And in learning that, they turned cloud into a conveyor belt that carried steel to the same throats day after day until those throats closed. There is a quiet bravery in these choices that hides behind technology. It looks like a hand that doesn't shake over a stopwatch. It sounds like a navigator counting down, in a voice that has no room for panic. It feels like a pilot holding a gentle bank for a full minute over a city he never sees. It lives in the moment when a bombardier refuses to chase a glimpse through a ragged hole, and instead trusts the ring on a screen to kiss a point he will never look at with his own eyes. They were ordinary men inside machines, and the machines gave them a way to be relentless when the sky said no. When you step back from the missions and listen, the war turns into percussion. Range, range, now. Minute mark, doors, release. Another yard's heartbeat stumbles, another plant wheezes, another timetable unravels. The old way loved the blue sky photo of a perfect hit. The new way loved returns, coming back before repairs could breathe. Schedule beat perfection because logistics break by rhythm. Railways choke when classification stutters every night. Fuel starves when outages overlap, and repairs never quite catch up. The victory here is not a single crater. It is a calendar. By winter's edge, the lesson is written in the way the enemy moves, or rather, fails to. Reinforcements reach fronts thinner than planned, columns idle, trains sit uneven on damaged points. A fighter lifts for a sortie that should have existed on paper, and turns back for lack of octane that never arrived. In that emptiness, you can hear the steady voices from England, the circles held over France, the green scopes glowing over Germany. Clouds tried to make the sky a wall. Oboe, GH, and H2X made it a hallway. So, let's close where we began, with weather pressing low, with men breathing through rubber and trusting math, with a war decided not by a single clear day, but by the refusal to let bad days matter. The revolution of 1944 wasn't just new boxes in cockpits or vans full of valves. It was the choice to value cadence over spectacle, time over sight, pressure over proof. Clouds stopped being a ceiling. They became the drum that kept the beat until movement slowed and fuel ran thin. The content of this video is compiled from multiple sources. If anything needs correction or clarification, please comment below. See you next time.